Hello and welcome to Fats on Film. I am your host, Hannah Ogilvy Young, and this is the podcast where we discuss all things fat representation in film, TV, and wider media. This week, my guest is Holly Lown, otherwise known as the Fat Museum on Instagram, which is our digital curator. Hello, Holly. How's it going?
Hiya. Yeah, it's going very well, thank you.
Oh, it's great to have you on the podcast, Holly, because we've obviously known each other being online. I mean, to be fair, it's how I meet all of my guests, is through the online community of fat folks. A fantastic community, if we don't say. And I would just love our audience to understand a little bit more about what you're doing over on the Fat Museum Instagram account.
Yeah. So I actually did my master's in museum studies.
Oh,
And
wow.
for my dissertation was titled The Fat Museum Representation of Fat Bodies in Museums.
Oh,
So it came out of the fact that for that project, I had so many images and so many stories in my head and all this information that I just went, it cannot be contained to a 15,000 word academic essay. I'm going to start an Instagram page, basically to show that fat people have always existed throughout history. Going back to early civilization across all cultures, there are depictions of fat people. You know, there are pictures, there are photos, there are sculptures. And to anyone who says, you know, fatness is a modern, you know, crisis, it's completely not true, because fat people have always existed. It's just a variation on human bodies. And that's the aim of the Instagram, is to show people that and to make fat people feel at home, show that you do have a history and you have a culture and you can connect with that, and you do not need to be ashamed and you do not need to feel alone, because there have been people that look like you throughout history.
That was so beautifully put, Holly. And I know for one, I absolutely love the Fat Museum content for exactly the reasons you've just listed. It really is that affirmation that we've always been here. And I think, like you say, we've all heard growing up, oh, you know, the O word, it's an epidemic, it's a modern disease, blah, blah, blah. But through your content, you prove with literally like one post, like that is absolutely not true. And we've always been here. We're allowed to be here. We're allowed to take up space. And like, you know, there's some fantastic quotes like, you know, 500 years ago, our bodies would have been worshipped, right? You know, that kind of idea, like how the beauty ideal has changed. And you can document that through, like you say, all the artwork that you've kind of collated. And I didn't realize it was linked to your dissertation, like linked to your master's degree. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was really fun, actually. I never thought writing 15,000 word dissertation would be fun.
Yeah,
and actually,
totally.
I got so into it. And it is one of the few pieces of academic work on this subject.
Yeah.
There was not a lot of sources to read about the representation of fat people in museums. So I was like, well, I'm just going to make my own. If nobody else is doing it, I might as well just do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's interesting because, you know, obviously I've got you as a guest, but I've had a previous guest, Abby, from the More Than Tracy Turnblad podcast, and she's doing the exact same thing. She's doing an academic degree in I believe it's fat representation in film and TV. And I think like that, I don't know if this is true because I'm going by my poll of 2 people, but it, but it definitely feels like there is this real wave or interest in academically documenting our representation, because it's just, up until this point, it's just so vilified. And I think, I mean, it makes so much sense, but it's so natural to try to find a home and try to find, you know, like, this sounds a bit existential, but like, why do I exist in the way I am? And then to find, like, you know, an account like yours, it goes, well, we've always been here, babe. We've always been here. You know, be comfortable in that body, because there's nothing unusual about it, because it existed 50 years ago, it existed 200 years ago, it existed 1,000 years ago, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is a whole fat studies academic area.
Yeah,
And it's fantastic, and it was such a great resource to pull on.
Oh, amazing.
And I do think there are more and more people addressing the representation of fatness in different spaces.
Yeah.
You know, not just kind of the politics of fatness, but also then moving that into, you know, arts and media and culture. And it's wonderful, and it's so nice to see other people doing it as well, and knowing it that you're in it together. You know, we're all doing it together, and if we can all contribute, then maybe we can get to a place where it is the norm to consider fatness as a kind of category of marginalization when you're doing work like curating an exhibition.
Absolutely. And I just for the listeners listening, the link to the Fat Museum Instagram account will be in the show notes below. So go give it a follow, go get inspired and nurtured, and like Holly says, find a safe space. I mean, Lord knows we need them. Lord knows. And I like to think this podcast is a little safe space as well. But anyway, while we're here, Holly, we're here to talk about fat representation film and TV, as I said earlier. And something I want to try this year, because listeners, this is the first recording of this year, just FYI. I don't know if you need to know that, but now you do. And I wanted to start asking my guests their relationship with the word fat. Because I said to Holly just before we hit record, I recognise, the podcast is called Fats on Film. I call myself a fat person. You have your account called the Fat Museum. We use the word fat very, for lack of a better term, nonchalantly. But I appreciate that this can be a triggering word. It definitely was for me. 10 years ago, oh my God, the idea of calling myself fat, not even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, I would have recoiled. And so I recognize I now come from a place of privilege to a certain extent. And Holly, seeing as you also use the word fat in the same way that I do, I'd love to know just a little bit about your history with that word. Like, when did you get to a point where you could feel comfortable with the word fat?
I mean, it was the same for me. For many, many years, it felt like an insult.
100%.
And it felt like something to be ashamed of.
Mm-hmm.
Fat was a joke. It was, you couldn't exist as a fat person. You had to be plus size. You had to be
curvy,
chunky. I don't know, all these weird kind of words like, oh yeah, she's large, but she's got a beautiful face. Like, you couldn't say, yeah, she's fat. And I think that came to me a few years ago as I kind of went on this journey of discovering a whole community of fat people.
Absolutely.
And that they were there living just who they are. And to be honest, being fat was kind of important to them, but also just wasn't really that important to them. They were just a person. And so I just started wanting to use it as a kind of, okay, yeah, let's just reclaim it. Like, yeah. I'm fat. What of it?
And so what? Yeah. And you're absolutely, it is a real reclamation, isn't it? Because you're absolutely right. I think if anyone identifies themselves as fat now or has done in the past, I think they will have negative memories associated with that word, of course, because it is so negatively used. And I saw something recently where, I don't know, someone just being a dickhead on TikTok, as you do. And someone's like, well, how come you can call yourself fat, but when I call you fat, it's an insult? And of course, the obvious answer is it's all about intention. If you call me fat as a neutral describing word, I'd be like, yeah, crack on. Like, that's literally what I am. It's like calling myself blonde or I've got curly hair. Like, I'm fat. Like, that's cool. I'm cool with it. But if you use it to insult me, to make me less than, to make a comment on my appearance or my intelligence or my success as a human being or whatever it might be, then of course it's an insult. But that is with any type of word. I could say that. I could make that intention with the word short, for example.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I've been we'll get into the episode, but Gavin and Stacey, they use the word fat in a very negative context. And I appreciate it's also 2007 and times have changed. Right? I think that's actually another really important thing we should know is that, where we are with the word fat, we are in a very different place now than we were, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It was probably the worst thing you could be, according to the fashion magazines. When I was doing my dissertation, obviously I was openly using the word fat to my supervisor. And I was like, that's a word I'm happy to use. And she said that she then was, going to her other colleagues and be like, I've got this student, she's doing this fantastic work, about fat studies and, she's a fat person. And she said that the person she was talking to was like, oh my God, you can't call her that.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And that instant recoil because they think she must be insulting you.
Yeah. It's wild as well that people live in that space where fat is an insult, because I'm so used to using it just as a descriptor that when people then interpret it as an insult, I have to take a moment where I'm like, yeah, some people think it's horrible to be called fat.
Yeah.
It's just not part of my life anymore.
It's funny because I remember this one time, I was in the pub going for like a roast dinner, right? The Broadfield on Aberdale Road.
Oh yeah.
And I went into the bathroom, and as I was coming out, I like kind of crashed into this mother and her child. And this child, like, completely, like, obviously just said it, didn't think of any reason why they wouldn't, just went, "Oh, that's a big woman," like that. And it, like, this child, 7 or 8 years old, right? Like, so young, just obviously just surprised. And the thing is, like, I was wearing a really big puffy dress, so in more ways than when I was very large. And their mum was like, "Don't say things like that," and I was like, no, it's actually fine. Like, they're just seeing what they see. There was no malice behind it. Like, I literally like walked into them in the doorway. It's absolutely fine, and like just shush them in that way. Like, I mean, I understand why she did. That's the thing. Like, I thought she must have thought I would be insulted by that. But oh my god, like, couldn't have been less insulted. I thought it was really cute.
Yeah. Also, to like a small child, all adults are big.
Literally, and I'm wearing this ridiculous dress with these massive puffy sleeves. I am a big person, I'm a fat person, and I literally walked into them as I'm like leaving the bathroom. No wonder.
Oh my god, you scarred that poor child for life. They're like, oh my god, did you know there are giants?
There are giant women out there. Oh no. Okay, well, let's get into the media we have chosen. So, Holly, we're here to talk about Gavin and Stacey. And so Gavin and Stacey is a British sitcom created, written and starring James Corden and Ruth Jones. Also stars Matthew Horn, Joanna Page, Alison Steadman, Larry Lamb, Melanie Walters and Rob Brydon. It premiered May 2007 and it ran for only 3 seasons. I know it has a few little specials and stuff, but 3 seasons. They then had, they had a Christmas special in 2019, and they also had another one literally this year, Gone, I believe. And it's won several BAFTAs throughout its run. It's considered one of the best British sitcoms of all time. I have never seen it. And so we're going to really rely on Holly for context with all my questions. But Holly, could you please let me and the listeners know what Gavin and Stacey is all about?
So Gavin and Stacey is really a story about real life and real people. So it focuses on Gavin, who is from Essex, and Stacey, who is from Wales. And they meet through work and they're talking on the phone for like months and months. And then they finally meet in person and they have this like whirlwind romance where they end up getting married very quickly and kind of they fall in love very quickly. And then it kind of focuses on them and their kind of ups and downs in their relationship, but also the wider story of what happens when, you know, 2 people get together and then their families are suddenly kind of joined by these 2 people, and the kind of the joy and the drama that happens when these kind of strangers all have to be in a room together and all have to try and, you know, make friends for the sake of this couple. So I think it's a great like look into UK culture at that time and UK family life, and I think it's a great little time capsule of what we were doing at that time and the things that we found funny at that time.
I'm so glad you told me how they met, because I'm watching episode, again for the listeners, I asked Holly, I don't have time to watch the whole thing. What should I watch as prep for this? And you told me to watch the first and the last episodes of every season, which is only 6 episodes because there's only 3 seasons. And the very first episode, I'm like, how did these 2 people meet? You know, like, what's going on? There's no Tinder at this time. I was like, they've got the little like flip phones. I was like, what? How are these people meeting? And so they work together. Well, that makes more sense.
I think they don't ever say it, but I think it's heavily implied that they both work maybe for the same company, but in different locations.
Yes.
And they call each other for some reason one day, and that's what sparks it all off.
Oh, okay. Thank you for clearing that up, because I can't remember if I googled it. One of the questions I did Google, Holly, was how old are these people meant to be? Again, I'm coming from a place of I've never seen an episode until 3 days ago. They read very young to me. Mm-hmm. They read like 20, 21. And then I googled it, and apparently they're meant to be like, I think Gavin's maybe 28 and Stacey's maybe 26. And I was very surprised actually at how old. I mean, I don't mean like they're ancient. They just read so much younger to me.
They do, yeah. I thought that watching it, you always assume maybe this is their first serious relationship.
Yes. I think what it doesn't help in that reading is that they both live at home. So they're both still like in their childhood bedrooms. So yeah, I literally thought like maybe they're like 20, and then to find out like Gavin is almost 30, I was like, oh, that's a little bit odd.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I totally agree with what you're saying about the kind of slice of British life. Because I mean, I don't know if we say this because we are British, so we can feel it a lot more, but it's a quintessentially British show, and I love the dynamic of the English family and the Welsh family. That's really, really fun, and like how, I mean, in some ways, like this is a fantastic like Welsh representation, and I loved how like the Welsh contingent, how they all talk to each other compared to the Essex contingent, how they all talk to each other. I know it's like very subtle, but like for example, the Welsh are a lot more like, there's no bullshit with the way that they talk to each other, and I love that. Like literally, the first bit when we meet Stacey, she's going in and she meets her like neighbor Doris, and she's like, "Oh, you're right, Doe," and like Doe's like, "Oh, I just want them to lob my leg off." I was pissing myself laughing. I loved it. I loved this little interaction with the neighbor and how just like blasé she was. And then she goes in and she sees her mum, and she's like, "Oh, I just saw Doris," and goes, "Oh, how's she doing?" She's like, "Yeah, she's all right." She was just complaining. Like outside, wanting her leg chopped off. Stacey, she's like, "Oh, Mum doesn't need to know that. That's just what just what Doris says, you know." And I love that dynamic so much. And if I'm honest, I've only watched 6 episodes, but I actually really understood why people like the show. And it's just one of those things where it just passed me by. And I think I will go back and actually watch it properly, because there were some parts where I was absolutely pissing myself laughing. So when I mean, obviously, I can imagine that, you can correct me, but it feels like that Gavin and Stacey, the characters, are probably like the least favourite out of the fans. And actually, the fans all love like the kind of periphery characters. Like, Bryn had me cackling.
Yep.
When he was trying to give Stacey the rape alarm for her to go to London, I was howling. What does he say? It's like, you know, if you when you come back raped and I've shown you how to use the rape alarm, well, I can rest easy in my bed tonight. But if I haven't shown you how this alarm works and you come back raped, well, I'll never live it down.
Yeah.
It was howling with laughter. It was so good. It was so good. But is that the vibe? Do the fans tend to like the kind of the co-stars more so than like the eponymous characters?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think Gavin and Stacey were a vehicle to get all these wacky characters into the series. And I think, you know, in particular, Gavin is very much the straight man. So he's 100%. Very much, I'd say, probably the most grounded of everyone, most kind of real. I think Stacey as well. I mean, a lot of people find Stacey annoying, which I partly think is probably misogyny. I think Stacey's hilarious, and I love how open and dramatic she is. But yeah, they're kind of like, their love story is what allowed the show to like get commissioned. But then it's all the other stories and all the other things happening in the background that are the real like heart of the show.
Yes, 100. When you were saying about how with relationships, or especially with marriages, it is also a union of the families. And so seeing how these two families then come together, and then you also have the added connection with Smithy and Nessa, which we'll get into, so that there's even more intertwining going on. It's just hilarious. Like, it really is like a really good, like, it's so normal. Like, in some ways, like this, it happens to the majority of people when they enter relationships, like their families also come together. But there's nothing like, I don't know, exceptional about any of them. I mean, apart from like Nessa, because obviously she has her stories of like having these like ridiculously wild stories, but they're not like, she doesn't brag about them. They just get dropped in. They just get like kind of like name dropped in, and like, oh, that happened in a past life for Nessa and we don't know anything more. Like, I love how, I think Gavin asked Stacey, like, "Oh, how old is Nessa?" And Stacey just goes, "No one knows. No one knows. She doesn't even know."
Yeah.
Like, I just love that. Like, that lore is so funny and rich and stupid. And I was very charmed by what I saw. And I have to say, I was a hater before Holly. I did not like Gavin and Stacey. I thought when they were announcing the episode over Christmas, I was like, who really gives a shit? Like, blah blah blah. And then I actually watched it. And I realised I was just being a hater because I'd never actually seen it, and I just don't like James Corden, and I have every right to not like that man. And if I'm honest, I've still come away from the show thinking I don't like him. I have questions.
Honestly, his presence is such a barrier to the show.
Literally, I was like, well, I don't watch this man at any point, so why would I watch this show where he is like a main character? And I really, like, we'll get into it, but I really didn't like Smithy, and I didn't like him throughout the entire episodes that I saw. So over 3 seasons, he doesn't do anything for me. But everyone else is like 10 out of 10 for me. Like, probably not Gavin, because like you say, because he's just not got really much going on, but he's not meant to have much going on.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone else is 10 out of 10. Like, so funny, like brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is such a charm to it that you just cannot like explain to someone when you're trying to be like, yeah, you should watch a 3-season comedy from 2000. Yeah. James Corden is the main star.
Mate, that's a hard sell.
How do you sell that? Yeah. But then you watch it and you're like,
oh no, it is good. Yeah. Begrudgingly. It's like, oh no, it is obviously kind of good.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about it. So why did you want to talk about Gavin and Stacey on this podcast when we think about fat representation?
So it was actually something that was said in the last Christmas special. They did a kind of look back documentary.
Okay.
And I hadn't really thought about the fact that Nessa and Smithy are fat, other than some of the awful jokes that get made. And then in this documentary, annoyingly, James Corden said this, which is even worse.
Oh.
He said
don't
something.
Make me like this man. Don't make me like him.
I'm sorry, but this is the one good thing he's done in his life. He did say something along the lines of, you don't often get to see people like us falling in love on screen. And I was like,
yeah,
oh my God, you're so right. And I didn't even think about that. And that's why I wanted to talk about it.
Absolutely. And God damn you, James, but he's absolutely right. Like, I was very struck by, obviously, I'm assuming from what I've seen on TikTok that the finale, the Christmas special just gone, is that they do end up together, which has kind of been the whole will they, won't they throughout the show. But he's 100% right. And I thought that watching it is, it's actually really nice to see two larger people. We'll get into their introduction because, my God, my mouth was agape. But when they do start to flirt and they obviously like have sex and stuff, I was like, this is actually really nice to see two larger people, because usually you pair off your fat person with a thin person, right? That's how it works. But to see actually two fat people get together, have sex, fall in love, have a baby, all that kind of stuff was actually really awesome. Like, really, really awesome representation to a point. We'll get into it.
Yeah, to a point. And it is so lovely, to see two fat people falling in love.
Yeah.
Because you don't get to see two fat people. You get the fat, lazy husband and the thin, naggy wife. And that's the kind of thing we're familiar with. So, there is something beautiful in that.
There really, really is. So let's talk about, I'm going to hit Smithy first as a character, just to let you know. I want to finish on a high. So start on a low. So the character of Smithy, which is James Corden's character, he is Gavin's like childhood best friend, and he has the gift of the gab. He loves to chat to people. He clearly can like make good connections with people, which is very, very, that's a very positive quality. Like, what does he do for a job? It looks like, is he like a builder or something?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Is he like considered competent at his job?
It's unclear. He definitely gets a lot of work. Like, he's you know, throughout the series, he's always got his own company. He's always had his own business. So he's clearly doing enough that he's getting enough work and he's getting paid. A couple of the scenes where he is in his line of work, you do question,
right?
Are you a good builder?
Are you good?
I don't know.
Because the only reason why I know he's a builder is because Mick and Pam have commissioned him to do the extension.
Yes.
But he starts at 4:00 in the evening. Yeah. And I was like, of course, this man is lazy. And I was just like, And this is more so than Nessa. I felt Smithy, again, for the few episodes I saw, was falling more into those fat tropes and stereotypes. And when we first introduced to him in episode 1, like, he comes round to the shipman's house and Pam says, like, there's 3 steaks going if you want them. And he says, oh, I've just had shepherd's pie, so I can polish 2 off. That's literally his introduction. And I was like, okay. You know, like, oh, we can't help ourselves. This man is obviously obsessed with food. And there's a few scenes, again, from what I saw, where, like, he's in a chip shop and he's ordering, like, a ridiculously long list of food. And then there's the you know, the iconic Indian takeaway scene. And I just felt like, oh, he loves his food, obsessed with food, potentially lazy. And really possessive as well, strangely obsessively possessive over Gavin. And I was just like, are these do we love these qualities that they've assigned to one of our 2 fat characters, you know?
Yeah. And I think if you read it, I guess, as a thin person making assumptions about a fat person, that is a fat stereotype. That he is lazy and he is greedy. But I see it as a fat person. Why can't he be greedy and lazy? Like, why does that have to be a stereotype or a bad thing? Like, I would love to order a chicken boon, a lamb boon, a prawn boon, a mushroom rice, and 9 poppadoms and just live my life. Like, maybe actually we could decide to interpret him as being free from the shackles of being the perfect fat person and instead just being whoever he wants to be. And if he wants to tile a bathroom and then go for a nap in the bath, why can't he do that? Like, that should be his God-given right.
Is that what he does? He needs to sleep. You know, he needs a sleepy boy. And the thing is, I would love to agree with you, Holly. I think, though, where we have such few representation of fat people, it is an interesting choice in the year of 2007 to adhere to what we would consider fat stereotypes. I absolutely hear you that obviously James Corden and Ruth Jones, they wrote this, so you know they are writing these jokes about their own bodies basically, and they're probably very aware of the stereotypes and tropes that people have assigned to them just because of their body size. But I'm also like, they knew how the audience were going to take that.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is that you know, watching it, what everyone else is thinking.
Yeah.
Like, you understand the joke that is being made because you have experienced it as a fat person.
Yeah, and they have as well. And so when I was watching these episodes, I was really struck by how Corden and Jones had wrote about themselves, like in comments, because obviously I know they're not Smithy and Nessa, but they have made their characters very much about their size as well. And I really respect and love that to a certain extent. Like, you know, going back to 2007, what James said in this documentary, like, we didn't see fat people falling in love. We didn't see that. We didn't see that representation. You know, looking at Nessa, who I'd love to we'll get into a bit more detail, but like, she's obviously this incredibly confident and self-assured woman who doesn't take shit, knows what she likes, doesn't care about public opinion. And I thought, that would have been really cool for me to have seen when I was younger. You know, like, how did you feel when you did you watch this in real time? Did you watch this when it came out in 2007?
I think I did.
Yeah.
I seem to remember sitting down on whenever it was, like a Saturday evening, and it was like a national event that Gavin and Stacey was on.
Yeah.
And I think at the time I didn't have that consciousness that these were 2 fat characters. I mean, if it came out in 2007, so I was, I think, 12 at the time. And I was just starting to realise that I was a big person and that was a problem for a lot of people. And so I think I probably shied away from the fact that they were fat and probably laughed along at those jokes. Because if you're a fat person and you laugh at the jokes, then people can't hurt you because you know the jokes already. You're already in on the joke.
You're in
and
on
it's
it.
fine.
Yeah.
So I do think I probably was laughing along at the idea that Smithy was lazy and fat at the time.
That's interesting. And so then, if you think about it now, you know, 17 years later, when you now watch, you know, you mentioned about Smithy that you've potentially, if we would like to apply a little bit of level and another level of acceptance and representation, we can say, well, you know what, Smithy is just a fat guy who lives in Essex, who's just working. You know, he's not fat and what should I say? He's not food obsessed because he's fat, or he's not fat because he's food obsessed. He is food obsessed, and he's also happens to be fat. Like, they are two separate things. And I love that. And I want to get there. I really, really do. Because ultimately, this is something that, like, I think about all the time, which is we all love food, right?
You literally have to eat.
We all love it, okay? We're programmed to love to eat. And yet somehow it's only fat people that get slapped on the, oh, you must love food. We all love it. Who are you kidding?
And also, food is so much more than just, what you're putting in your body to fuel yourself. Food is social connection. So many of the scenes in Gavin and Stacey where they're eating are because they've come together as a family to eat.
Yes.
Christmas dinner.
Very good point.
The infamous curry. All of these things are about social occasions because food is part of that. It's about connecting with people.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely spot on. And, Gwen, for example, she shows her love and tenderness through cooking for the family.
Through the omelettes.
Through the omelettes!
Eggs does that woman get through every week?
She is... Does she only make omelettes? No, because she does the spread for the christening for Neil the baby.
Yes, she definitely does do other food, but I get the sense omelettes are her
thing. And honestly, I was obsessed with Gwen's pinny. I was like, babe, you rock it. Like, she's like, if any one of my family needed an omelette, I'm there. She's ready to go. She's snapping to action.
Frying pan already heated, eggs pre-cracked, ready to go.
It's so funny. But yes, absolutely, you're completely right. That is how not just Gavin and Stacey is in the show, but like everyone shows like love and care and a celebration and mourning is through food. And I remember when I was like kind of breaking away from diet culture, when I was still in it, I was very much in that sense of like, I was trying to get myself to see food as fuel, and that's it. Because I was in this real like binge eating cycle, and I would get like everyone, I would get like such a dopamine hit from eating, and I was just constantly chasing that. One of the reasons why I binge ate, but a big one. And so I was desperate to see that diet culture way of seeing food. Like, it's just fuel, remove any attachment or emotion to it. And then actually when I was doing my recovery, that was one of the things we reinforced is like, no, food is more than fuel. There is emotion attached to it. There is celebration and social occasions and exploring like the world and cultures through food. It's a very important part of what it is to be a human. And I really worked to remove that stigma from it. So when I can't agree more with you, and you're absolutely right, Gavin and Stacey do that to a certain extent, while also taking the piss out of Smithy. And I found that throughout what I saw was they literally are feeding, pun intended, feeding with one hand and then like kind of smacking your face with the other, being like, oh my god, look at this like really great representation, a really good like characterization of large people which we never see on our screens, BBC, and let me just slap you in the face afterwards because how you got to be laughing at Smithy as well. And I was just like, why? And I know it's meant to be a comedy as well. And so you're balancing that, and it's a really quick way to get a joke, isn't it? Unfortunately, especially at this time of 2007. Really quick joke is to like mock the fat character.
And we all get it.
Yes.
We all see a fat person and we think, okay, fat represents lazy, greedy, unloved, stupid. Like, that's a really quick association that throughout history we've slowly begun to understand. So you don't even need to say anything about Smithy's excessive Indian order because you get the joke already. You don't even have to explain anything. And that's how malicious fat phobia is that you don't even have to have it shoved in your face and you get the joke.
Yes, and it's ingrained in us from such a young age. Through the, I mean, actually, that's a side note for me is starting to think about like children's shows where this kind of like anti-fat representation comes in, because it is from really early on. I mean, like off the top of my head, I've gone SpongeBob SquarePants. Like, look at Patrick. Like, he is the fat dumb sidekick. And it starts really super young. And it's interesting that fat, dumb, lazy sidekick is something that transcends like all ages, because we have it in SpongeBob SquarePants and we have it in Gavin and Stacey. Like,
Yeah.
what is it about that kind of fat best friend is such a trope? What do you think that trope is saying on the whole, and how do you think that trope is then employed in Gavin and Stacey?
I think for the most part, I mean, it's a cheap laugh.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just a really easy way to diffuse tension. You know, when the fat best friend comes on screen during a heated moment and they're like eating a box of donuts, like immediately that's the tension gone. And I think it's also it's kind of a moral thing.
Yeah.
So, you know, people are often coded to be immoral, or there's something wrong with their character. And that allows the main character to be the best person ever, you know, to be really good, or to be really complicated and complex and deep. So it's that playoff that you can then get between your main and your side character. And I do think Smithy is that for a lot of the series. You know, he kind of is that friend that Gavin is played off against. But then as the series develops, you start to realize actually he's a complex three-dimensional character, which I think is a bit of a saving grace in Gavin and Stacey, is that I could list things about Smithy that are not associated with his weight. You know, I think he's a really passionate person who feels things really deeply. You know, he cries a lot when he thinks Gavin is going to leave him. And that shows he's got something really in him that cares for the people around him. You know, he's a good father. You know, he's a good father figure to his son, and he tries to care for his son even though they are separated by distance. And he's also, you know, he's a funny person. He's there, he makes people laugh, not because he's fat, but because he does things that are funny, and he makes great jokes and all of these things which have nothing to do with the fact that he's a fat person.
Yeah.
So, you know, Gavin and Stacey has its flaws, and there were so many times when I watched it and I cringed and I felt uncomfortable as a fat person. But then there were moments where I was like, you know, great that he can just be himself, and he is allowed to be so many more things than just the fat sidekick.
Yes, and I'm very happy to hear that, because I dipped my toe into this world and I unfortunately didn't get to see that much of those qualities of Smithy. But I'm really happy, like in the whole show he gets a lot more to do, and a lot more growth, and a lot more individualisms, which, you know what, is really awesome. When I think about, when I keep coming back to the time period this is set, and I would love to talk to like a randomer about how they view Smithy and Nessa. Like, not someone like, you know, us who like has done all this work, but someone who just off the street, like, oh, what do you think of them? Because obviously, like, Smithy was like well liked as a character, because he goes off and does like the comic relief thing with George Michael, and so there's, and I guess Smithy does unlock James Corden's success moving forward, right? Like, that really was his breakout role. So yeah. That's really positive that, like, you know, the British public really liked this portrayal of this character. Maybe he's frustrating for sure, but I mean, like, everyone's frustrating. We're all complex human beings, aren't we? So yeah, okay, you're turning me around. You're turning me around to Smithy, because I was like, ugh. But the reason I was like, ugh, my mouth was on the floor when they first meet Nessa at Leicester Square.
Oh my god.
I
didn't remember it being that bad.
Oh my god. So Gavin and Smithy are heading to London, and Stacey and Nessa have gone to London as well, because so Gavin and Stacey meet for the first time. And they meet, oh my god, also, sorry, side note, the fashion Holly. Oh my god, so Stacey's wearing this like bluey green top. Her nice top, I bet. And it has this halter neck up the neck, obviously, but then she still has her bra straps on show on her shoulders, and it goes down to like past her like waist, and then she has her jeans, and then her jeans are tucked into these tan knee-high boots. Oh my god.
And that was the height of fashion.
the height. And I saw her and went, oh my God, so River Island. And they literally made that joke. And I was like, I know. And but even like how Gavin is dressed really reminded me of like the Ordinary Boys.
Yes.
Very prestigious.
Classic. He's a classic Essex boy. That's what he looks like.
That's what he looks. Okay, great. Because I don't really know Essex all that well, apart from like Towie on occasion. But like, yeah, the hair, it's just spot on. And I love when she was, oh, I love your Corden. And I remember Cardis being really a thing back then. And oh my God, it was just like, loved it. Anyway, so they're meeting, and Smithy, he's already kind of said to Gavin, like, what if Stacey's mate's like gross or a bit of a munter and all that kind of stuff? And I was like, I've not heard that word in ages. Loved it. And Nessa comes through and she's holding 2 pizzas and she's talking about the price of them. And immediately Smithy is disappointed, clearly because he doesn't find her physically attractive. And then when they get to like the bar to have drinks, Smithy exclusively refers to Nessa as it,
which is horrendous, just awful. You know,
awful.
He says, "Look at the size of it."
It,
as if she's like, I don't know, a sort of whale in the sea, as opposed to a fully formed human being. Like, it's awful.
Yeah. I wrote a couple of things down. He says, "How old is it? Look at the size of it." And then Gavin does try to be like, well, mate, like, you're not exactly like thin yourself. And then I can't remember what Smithy says in retaliation, but he kind of just says, like, he basically palms it off to be like, it's okay for him to be big, but not for Nessa. And I was just like, this is so. I was incredibly uncomfortable, Holly. If I'm completely honest, I was very uncomfortable. I was not expecting this at all. I think to refer to Nessa as it really just upset me. Like, it just stripped her of all of her humanity. And then when they get, a bit more drunk and they start flirting, I was actually really disappointed that it ended up there, because I was like, obviously Nessa doesn't know that Smithy's been saying all that. So I'm not defending Nessa coming after Nessa at all. But for Smithy to just like completely, like, I don't know, this sounds like really tropey and like maybe even like quite rude to like, men in general, but it just comes across as like, oh, he doesn't really care about what she looks like because he just wants to get his dick wet. That's how it comes across. And I just found it all really foul and hurtful,
Yeah, it's incredibly uncomfortable, and it's even more uncomfortable knowing that that's meant to be funny. Like, it's meant to be funny that he thinks that way and then still sleeps with her.
Yeah, because it's conveying to the audience that you're not meant to find Nessa attractive, Yeah. And it's really trying to. But then on the same side, in the same episode, Dave, the guy who drives the bus,
Dave coaches.
Dave coaches. Okay, cool. Dave coaches. He clearly fancies the shit out of Nessa. So
she is hot shit in the show. Like, she has so many stories about all these men. Yeah, all these famous men who wanted to sleep with her. And I'm like, yes, girl.
Well, I personally love Nessa's look. Like, I love that sharp black bob. I love, like, it's funny because on one hand I'm thinking what she's wearing is very like plus size clothes. You know what I'm saying? Like
the cold shoulders, the skull print thing.
Exactly. But she makes it work for her.
It's iconic on her.
Yeah, I feel she would have chosen to wear that, not like she's been forced to wear it because it's the only thing available.
I think she invented that style. I think she went to like wherever it is and went, this is how I want to dress. And they went, well, all plus size women probably want to dress like that. Let's just do that for years.
Do that. No, it's bizarre. Like, because when I was watching it, I was going, oh my God, this is what they think we all want to wear. But she does look good in it. It really works for her. And I love how she's always in a skirt. Like, in a short skirt at that.
Yeah, and a leather, short, tight-fitting skirt and her high-heeled leather boots.
Loved it. Absolutely and I'm like, loved it.
Oh my God, you look hot.
No, she looks fantastic. And she's got that, like, the way she speaks, that really like kind of low, almost growl to her voice. I absolutely adored Nessa. And coming back to what I asked you earlier, I was very much like you growing up. I always wanted to disassociate myself with anyone fat on screen because it was never positive representation, so I didn't want to be associated with that. And I would always kind of like agree that the fat characters should be mocked or hated, because that's what fatness was, right? And I was trying so hard to like not be fat. So I think if I was to watch this in real time in 2007, I wouldn't have associated with Nessa. But watching it now, I absolutely love her character. And I think she is good representation, like actively good. Whereas I think Smithy is questionable. And I really love your take, Holly. I really, really do. But I think, unfortunately, I just don't think the public would have taken it that way. And they knew that.
I agree. I think Smithy is questionable.
Yeah.
I like to have my, fat studies glasses. Let's reinterpret a character. But I agree with you that and also he's written to be that way because we know the joke. And therefore he is a stereotype. He just is.
Yeah, but where your head has gone, that is the goal. That's the aspiration, right? But with Nessa, I just felt like she was good. And there were things where you could have argued that maybe like could fall into some tropes, but then they would always be kind of banished because other characters would do them. So for example, she's promiscuous, but loads of characters are promiscuous, so actually that's not a problem. She smokes. Everyone's fucking smoking in this show. And I was just
honestly, the shock that they are all smoking in pubs, and I was like, I'd forgotten that was a thing.
I never know when the smoking ban came in because I didn't live in the country, so I never know, but I was really surprised at like how prevalent everyone is smoking in this show. Like, it feels for me quite late, actually, like that people are still smoking totally normally like in the late noughties. But so she smokes a lot, sure, but so does everyone else. So like where you can like prescribe like unhealthiness to her, which obviously is like a good fat trope, like fat people are unhealthy. Actually, I think it gets balanced by someone else also being unhealthy. You could argue that maybe like when they go to London, she only takes her little bag, right? And she doesn't take any spare knickers, she doesn't bring a toothbrush, she only got Tic Tacs. You could argue,
which is just her being practical. She's just really organised.
Yeah, well, but I agree with you, because I think like in another show that would have been played to be like, oh, fat people are gross and unclean, but in this show it's to balance Stacey's overpacking.
Yeah.
So like so therefore the joke doesn't land on Nessa, being fat and unclean. It's more pointed at Stacey to be like, she has brought this massive luggage case to London. And what I loved, Holly, was that luggage case stays for the entire show. Every time she goes to Essex, she's got that massive case. It's just so stupid. But yeah, so I feel like whenever they did try to do what I would expect them to kind of feed into those tropes, they managed to balance it. And I can only assume it was a conscious effort from Corden and Jones to do that. But I'm really excited and happy that, okay, the fact we've got 2 fat characters in supporting roles is amazing. And I also really want to point out as well, these are like true fat characters. Right, they're not like Bridget Jones fat. Or like even Pam, Gavin's mum, she calls herself fat a few times from the episodes I saw, but she isn't a fat person, you know what I mean? But it was really cool to see like Ruth Jones and James Corden in these roles be like truly bigger people. And then also like have very complicated and growth storylines throughout the show was really, really cool.
Yeah, and I also thought it was incredibly amazing to see 2 fat writers writing 2 fat characters.
Yes.
Because so often fat characters are written by,
of course,
I'm going to assume thin people who don't really get what it is to be fat. They don't really know how to write a fat person that doesn't fall into a stereotype. And I can only assume that Ruth and James are bringing some of their experiences as fat people to the characters.
Yeah.
So whenever they do make these fat jokes, I always have a little place in my heart that thinks, I think someone said that to them once. I think they've heard that, and they must have, because they're fat people in 2007.
Mate, yeah.
And
they're in the entertainment industry.
Oh my God, I can't even imagine that. I mean, it's kind of impressive to me that they're still fat people.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, wow, it just shows that like you can be, in the industry and you can still be fat and it doesn't really matter.
absolutely spot on. And actually, it's something that just came into my head, and I want to know if you agree, because obviously you know the show better than I do. But it feels actually that Smithy and Nessa are unapologetically fat.
Mm.
From what I saw, they aren't on any diets. They aren't doing the new exercise regime. Pam is that, right? Pam is our diet-obsessed character of the show. But Smithy and Nessa, from what I saw, don't seem to do that. Is that accurate for the whole show?
I think there is a bit of a scene where James Corden is working out topless, and the joke is that he's a fat man working out topless and he's trying to, bulk up. But for the most part, both of them are not on a self-love journey. They're not learning to love themselves despite the fact they're fat.
Mm-hmm.
They're both just who they are, and they don't need to gain confidence because they're already very confident people, charismatic people who have fantastic relationships in their life. And it's lovely to see fat people who aren't insecure, who aren't shy, who aren't constantly thinking about dieting and all of that stuff. They just exist and they're just part of their family, and they don't need to change themselves in order to be loved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with that sentiment. Again, from the very little I saw. How do Gavin and Stacey treat them throughout the show? Like, do they ever make comments about their size? I mean, we mentioned earlier about how Gavin said, when Smithy was going after Nessa, being really horrible, he's like, you're not exactly thin yourself, basically. How do Gavin and Stacey treat them? Do they ever bring up their weight? Do you ever feel like they may treat them lesser than because of their size, or maybe put them down to be you are the supporting character to my main character storyline type thing?
I think for the most part, they're just their friend.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, they're just friends. There is a fantastic scene, and it's a great joke. And a content warning, it does mention suicide, and I appreciate that is not funny to everyone. Mm-hmm. But there is a scene where Smithy's really sad about something, and he goes, I'm just thinking about ending it all. How many Nurofen do you think I'd have to take? And Gavin's like, well, for you, I think it might be hundreds. And Smithy goes, oh, well, I can't afford that because I want to go on holiday later this year. And first of all, that's a hilarious way to make a fat joke, because that is genuinely quite funny and isn't punching down at a fat person. And I think that kind of shows Gavin's feeling towards Smithy, and that he acknowledges that he's a fat man.
Yes.
But it's not, it's not a joke to him. He's not taking a piss out of it.
No.
It's just part of who Smithy is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's so true that the people around you sometimes don't know how to handle the fact that you're fat.
Absolutely.
And sometimes make comments like that they don't quite know how to say it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it comes off as rude, and sometimes it's just a comment, and it's that complex nature of, navigating having a fat friend.
Yeah.
And how do you interpret that, and how do you treat them? And I think, luckily for Gavin and Stacey, they both just see Nessa and Smithy, as their sort of other halves, really.
Yes. Platonic soulmates.
Mm-hmm.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm just looking at my notes. So we've spoken about Smithy and Nessa quite a bit, but something else I wanted to consider was outside of those two characters, are there any other kind of larger fat characters, or anyone else we wanted to talk about in this kind of context? So I obviously mentioned Pam a few times because I was really struck. I knew exactly the character she was, and she is your stereotypical mum who's always trying to lose weight, right? We all know this person, and so when we first introduced to her, she's on the Atkins, and I was like, ooh, hello. So they're having steak for dinner, but she doesn't want the carbs, so she can't have the chips. And so she has another steak, and she doesn't want the peas, so she has another steak. So she had three steaks.
I think that is such a great joke to make about diet culture.
Yeah, because it's nonsense.
Because actually, it's nonsense.
It's nonsense.
And actually, you end up eating 3 steaks, which we know red meat is not fantastic to eat in excess.
3.
But because the diet book has told you that that's healthier than having a balanced meal.
Yeah, and some peas.
Yes. It's mad.
Oh my god, but it's so funny because she, I don't know, her defensiveness when Gavin and Mick rightfully question what she's about to consume. And her defensiveness felt so real to me. Because when you're not in diet culture, it must, well, it does, because we're now outside of it, but it looks absurd to the people inside it. Like, so inside it, you're like, well, this is what we do. Like, I'm obviously going to have 3 steaks instead of having chips and peas with my steak. I'm obviously not going to have breakfast for this slim fast shake, because that's how I lose weight. Like, that's so obvious. But if you're on the outside of that and you've not been, and it's very pointed, like, the 2 men don't get it and the woman does. It just looks insane. And really unhealthy, and when that all happens, and Mick's like, can be like, you can't have 3 steaks. That's wild. And Pam kind of says like, oh, you're gonna be mocking me now down the golf club. Your fat, sad, fat, disgusting wife is what she calls herself, and she just goes down this spiral of like shame. And I know it's played for laughs, but it felt really real to me, because I know exactly what she means. And you mentioned earlier, like, wondering if like Ruth and James wrote from their own experience. I believe that scene was so accurate that they must have written that from experience, because I've definitely gone down that spiral before. If someone's questioned my latest diet that I'm following, and therefore the food that I'm eating that day, and someone's challenged it, I would get so defensive, Holly, because I'm trying my best. I'm trying to right the wrongs of my fatness, and now you're challenging me on that when the diet that I've paid 20 quid for says it'll work.
Yeah, I'm trying to be the good fatty here.
Yeah. I just thought, like, in that simple 2-minute scene, I understood Pam. I understood her point of view, and it really made me sad for her. I was like, oh baby. Again, like, coming back to showing love through food. Obviously Pam cooks for her family. They have family.
She loves a buffet. She loves doing a little buffet.
Does she love a buffet? Is that a thing?
Yeah, like multiple times she's like, I'm gonna do a buffet tonight for everyone, and I'm like, yes,
do it, babe. Absolutely do it. And like, she obviously like loves Smithy and happy to feed him as well. Like, he's like their second son, isn't he? But I was just like, Pam's image of herself is so sad to a point of view. I don't know, like, does her like kind of obsession with diets like continue throughout the show?
I think it gets mentioned,
yeah,
but it fades into the background, definitely.
Good. Well, that's happy. That makes me happy for her.
And it's interesting because before Gavin and Stacey, Ruth Jones, James Corden, and Alison Sedman all starred in Fat Friends.
Fat Friends.
Which is a series about a weight loss group.
Yes.
So obviously, all 3 of those actors have some, knowledge of what it's like to be in the diet industry, because they starred in this show. And I assume Ruth was writing from her personal experiences in that show. So there is this kind of thread throughout Gavin and Stacey of the acknowledgement of all of this stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I haven't seen Fat Friends, have you?
No, and I don't think I can do it, because I get the sense it's not going to be as lovely as Gavin and Stacey. I think there will be worse things in there, and I just can't be bothered.
Can't be arsed, right? Why do we do this to ourselves? I mean, that's like the blessing and the curse of this podcast, and I acknowledge this massively, which is I'm potentially exposing myself to get really annoyed at like fat representation or the lack of positive fat representation. So there's one thing, and there's also this like double-edged sword I've created with this thing, which is like, I want to get to a world where we no longer have to think, hey, that was really good fat representation. Because it's just every show, every film has fat representation, and they're just all multifaceted. We have fat villains, we have fat heroes, we have fat side characters, we have everything. There's no trope because we have everything. And so then I appreciate then what I'm doing is I'm like highlighting, but I'm like doing the opposite. Like, instead of like getting to a point of going, hey, we no longer need to talk about fat representation because we're there, I'm actually highlighting that when it is there. Does that make sense? So I'm like, I don't know. I think it's right to talk about it. I really do. Otherwise I wouldn't do the podcast. But I my goal with this podcast, it becomes irrelevant at some point.
Well, that's the goal, is that at some point, all of this work will become irrelevant.
Yeah.
Because fat people are just part of society.
They're just at peace.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just at peace.
I understand.
Thank you. So going back to the fat friends thing, like, someone's going to ask to do it on this podcast, and I'm going to have to watch, and I'm going to have to get pissed off, aren't I?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some reviews that
have you? I don't know anything about it.
It is a little bit more sympathetic than you would anticipate, but I just don't know. I just am like, I'm trying to live a peaceful life. I don't need, like, Gavin and Stacey was great and fine, and there were moments that made me cringe and feel really bad, but it was manageable.
Yeah.
I just don't think I want to put myself through it.
No, totally. It absolutely was. Like, there were moments where, like I said, like, I was like, whoa. But for the majority, it sounds like it has a lot more going on for it, which is amazing. And I keep coming back to it, but for the time period as well. Like, we have to acknowledge how awesome that is.
And it really encapsulates how sometimes the worst comments can come from the people you love. But they still love you at the end of the day, and they still treat you the same. But there's so much internalized fat phobia that they can say these things about you, to you, but they still love you and they still care about you. Pam does actually have a political campaign at one point.
Tell me more!
Despite the fact she, is a chronic dieter.
Yeah.
She, her and her friends sort of form a local action group against, I think it's putting up a phone mast in a field. And admittedly, it is kind of conspiracy theory in that she's like, they're trying to control our brains, which is such a mum thing to happen, where you just get indoctrinated.
It's very Mumsnet. She was on Mumsnet, and they said it once, and she was like, oh my God, I'm running with that. Is this the same group where she was going to enter Britain's Got Talent?
Yeah, and one of her friends is Big Fat Sue, and that's what she's known as. And we do actually get to see, she doesn't speak, but we do see Big Fat Sue, and she is a fat person.
Fair play.
And admittedly, I'm like, why did she need to be Big and Fat Sue? She could have just been Fat Sue.
Well, it's like small fat Sue.
We have to call her Big Fat Sue.
No, Big Fat Sue. She's not a small fat, she's a big fat.
I know. Yeah. I was like, oh, maybe we're doing some really cool, small fat, medium fat, infinity fat.
Infinity fat, yeah. Nope.
But I just think I do have a soft spot for Pam, and I love that she calls Gavin her little prince, and that's what he is to her, and she loves him so much.
Gavin's her little prince, love that. No. And I think, again, something that should be applauded in Gavin and Stacey is we have really strong family units. Again, other shows, other sitcoms, families fall apart, they argue, they don't like each other, the mum and dad hate each other but they're sticking together for the kids, all that kind of stereotypes you see. That does not exist in this show. Like, Nick and Pam love the shit out of each other, they love their son. When Gavin has moved to the Wales office and they're all ringing him on his first day, and what really got me, because again I didn't, from the episode I saw, I didn't know Mick that well because he just wasn't big parts of those episodes. But in that particular one, he rings Gavin just to ask him how he's doing, and Gavin goes, "Oh yeah, Dad, I'm just with my boss." And he goes, "Oh, say no more, talk to you later," and he hangs up. And I was just like, oh, even like Daddy wants to know how his son is doing. It just really warmed my heart.
Yeah, and it's really nice to see families that aren't nuclear families.
Yes.
So obviously you do have Pam, Mick and Gavin, and they're quite a traditional nuclear family. Yeah. But then you have Stacey's family.
Yeah.
So Stacey's dad died,
yes,
and her uncle Bryn kind of stepped in to, support them. So you have this kind of non-traditional family where it's a mum and an uncle and two kids, and they kind of exist as their own unit. And then you also have Smithy, who, his dad isn't around, so he has a single mother, and he's got a sister as well. So they're, their own family unit. And it's so nice to see normal families who aren't, your traditional kind of family. And it's so nice to see them, love and care for each other.
Yes.
And the acknowledgement that family is not necessarily blood, it's not necessarily who you're related to.
Absolutely.
Smithy is Mick and Pam's other son, and they say that in the finale, and it's a beautiful moment, and it made me tear up because Mick was like, we really wanted more kids, and we couldn't have more kids. And then one day Gavin brings home, this little boy called Smithy, and you are our son. That's how we see you. And I thought that was so beautiful for Smithy, as someone who's grown up without a dad, to have this amazing man be like, you're my son, you know, and I love you. And it was just, it's lovely and wonderful. And you're like,
nice.
You all care for each other.
Yeah.
And you have your arguments.
Sure.
And sometimes, you know, you're at each other's throats. But you always come back to you come back to the dinner table at the end of the day, and you're all mates.
Yeah, and on that, when Nessa's going to get married to Dave Coaches, and she says to Gwen, like, you know, you've saved me. I wouldn't have got through. I'm assuming because like her mum must have passed at some point, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I wouldn't have got through it without you. And then she kisses Gwen on the lips, but Gwen is so like touched.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, because I was like, up until that point, Nessa had been quite short with Gwen, and she was ordering Gwen about on the, especially on the because like Gwen's made the wedding dress and all that kind of stuff. And then I thought, then when she said like, you've helped me through, you've got me through it, I was just like, this again, because does Nessa live with them, or?
So at one point she does.
Yeah.
She moves in after when she has the baby.
Neil the baby.
Because Neil the baby. Because Stacey moves to Essex to go live with Gav. And then Nessa moves into Stacey's old room with the baby. So it is very much a kind of parental relationship.
Yeah, very
that
much
they do
so.
have.
Oh, it's so sweet. And
it's so rare to see fat characters who are just loved.
Yeah, just loved, and
they're just loved,
just loved, and that it's as simple as that. Yeah, welcomed into families with open arms, supported, encouraged, and then not even their families. But then on that, I don't even know what episode it is, but we meet Smithy's mum, Kath, played by Pam Ferris, icon, legend. Spoken about her already on this podcast because of Matilda. Is that the only time we meet Kath?
I think she gets mentioned a few times.
Yeah.
And she does come back, I think, in the finale.
Does she?
So she's a kind of a minor side
Very
character.
minor. It's more like a cameo, isn't it? Because it's Pam Ferris.
Yeah.
But again, like, she's a bigger person. And we see that she's obviously not the most active mum in the world. It's commented a lot that she is an alcoholic, even though she's disguising it as narcolepsy. Obviously, let Smithy... I mean, how old is Rudy meant to be? Because reads young.
I assume Rudy's younger and perhaps early 20s, maybe even a teenager still.
Yeah, she reads younger. So yeah, and she's obviously doing her own thing, right? And I just think, like, yeah, Kath is very, like, hands off. And so it makes sense why Smithy found kind of refuge and parental love in Mick and Pam.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he, and there is a mention that Kath goes to a single parent support group.
Oh, okay.
So you can infer certain stuff that may have happened there in that relationship. So Smithy is coming from a difficult home.
Yes.
And in some ways, although Smithy is very annoying and he is quite immature, I am like, well, it's no surprise, given that he grew up in not a particularly stable home. And thank God, he found Gavin and he found this relationship.
Yeah.
Because it could have, he could have been a very different person, I think, if he hadn't found them.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. But it's all good because he did.
Yeah.
On that, a question I've been asking my guests recently is, outside of the kind of fat characters we're highlighting in this episode, what does the kind of rest of the world look like for Gavin and Stacey? When we look at the extras or the other even minor supporting characters, do we have much body diversity going on there?
So I think they shot a lot of their scenes in public, if that makes sense, or they just kind of shot them with local people, or you get the sense that in the background, there's not like models walking around in the background, or you're not in London and everyone's white.
Yeah.
It is a kind of slice of life in that the background actors are just sort of normal people. And, there's scenes where they're at weddings and they're at christenings.
Yes.
And you look around, who's in the background, and you just think, yeah, that just looks like people. Like, that just looks like normal people who've attended an event or are just walking around the streets. So I do think there is a niceness in that you're not taken out of it by the fact that everyone in the background is like sort of beautiful and thin and wearing really expensive clothing. It's like it just looks like a normal street, in Barry.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I've noticed this with British shows more so than American shows, which is that the background is always very well, I believe, very well diverse. They, like you say, they genuinely look like they went down the high street, scooped up some people and brought them over. I'm thinking Nessa's dad was a larger person. In the wedding episode, Gavin and Stacey's wedding, like one of I think must be one of Stacey's friends gets with one of Gavin's friends, and she was like a curvier girl. I thought there were just little moments where, there was just a diverse range of people, and it just felt really real. It felt really real. On that note, there's a cameo by John Prescott. I was like, that's hilarious. I genuinely had to pause to piss myself laughing because I want to know how they got that.
Well, I mean, him and Nessa had a complicated relationship. So obviously,
but how did they get John Prescott to just walk into a church like that? Oh my god! The other thing that again cracked me up: Noel from Hearsay being a friend. I'm assuming he's Welsh. I didn't know that, but I'm assuming he is. But it's just, he had no lines, but he was just in these random shots, and hilarious. Eat it up. I just ate it up.
I mean, that is how big Gavin and Stacey was.
Yeah.
Was that it would have been, I don't know, whatever, Gavin and Stacey's media team contacting, John Prescott's, marketing team. And the moment, they dropped in, we'd like you to do a cameo in Gavin and Stacey, I think it would have been incredible because Gavin and Stacey was one of the most watched TV shows, and it had great, the public loved it. So if you were, an MP and you starred in Gavin and Stacey, that's going to give you a bit of street cred.
I mean, okay, sure. I mean, again, John Prescott, you do you, whatever. I mean, I know he's dead now, but you do you.
Rest in peace.
Well,
Rest in peace.
Politician.
Rest in something.
Just, you're dead. I have no idea whether he was a good man or not, but my gut feeling is if you were in, I'm getting political again, if you're in Tony Blair's cabinet, you're not a good man. But anyway. But on that, coming back to Fat Love, John Prescott and Nessa, two fat people who had a relationship. Yeah. Another representation. Hey, we got to take it where we can,
I know.
Hilarious, but you're right. It feels very coming back to Tony Blair again, but it feels like when Catherine Tate did the Tony Blair sketch for Comic Relief. It's very that.
Yes,
they're personable. They understand
honestly,
pop culture.
Bring it back when politicians would be on comedy shows and actually showed that they had some sort of personality, or at least someone on their media team had some sort of personality. Can you imagine Keir Starmer appearing in any sort of comedy? It would be I don't know, like a wooden puppet suddenly. He'd sort of get on stage and wide-eyed. He's not got a charismatic bone in his body.
Again, this is not a political podcast, but I really wanted an uneventful Prime Minister. Right? I really did. I was fucking sick to the back teeth of these fucking drama queens. And then we get this man. And he has never known a spine, right? Never known. He is, you say he's wooden, because he's got no fucking spine. He needs something to keep him upright. He is just, I fucking hate him. I hate all of them, I want to point out. I am not affiliated with any political party because I think we should burn it all down and start again. And I just think it's ridiculous. And I hate it so much. I hate where we are in the world. I hate it with a passion. And in some ways, I was talking to one of my fat content creator friends over Instagram yesterday. They're American. And I said, how you doing? And they were like, yeah, not great. And I was like, you know what? Fair. It's fucking maddening out there. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills all the time. And so I guess to that point, when I saw John Prescott, you're absolutely right. It really did harken back to a different time politically, where I was like, what? Why is this man in this show right now? And like, it was hilarious. But if that happened now, we would instantly see it as like, oh, you're trying to appeal to like, an audience. You're trying to show that you're down to earth. All that. It would be criticized to all hell, and I would be doing it as well, Holly. I want to point out, I would also be criticizing it. You just couldn't do that now.
Yeah.
But it was just such a different time back then.
It was. And another thing is that it was on TV at 9:30 on a Saturday every week. So you don't have the same issue now where there's so many streaming services.
Yeah.
And I would be talking to someone about a really fantastic series I've watched. They're like, I've never even heard of it. Yeah. Whereas at that time, like, everyone knew what Gavin and Stacey was. It was like making headlines, and you could walk into start up a conversation with a stranger, and the chances are they've heard of Gavin Stacey or they've watched Gavin Stacey.
Yes.
So immediately it becomes a way to connect with people, and it becomes a way, like a shared experience that we had as a nation almost.
Yeah.
And I really miss that about terrestrial TV, that I could sort of talk to anyone about what was on telly last night, and immediately we could, get chatting.
Did you watch The Traitors?
I did. Yeah. I did. I do think that is one of the shows that has carried on that tradition of British telly.
100%. No, that's why I brought it up, because I'm like, that's the only show I could think of in recent memory where that is a thing. We watch it every night it's on, and then the next day we talk about it. Like, we don't do that anymore, because we either, they just dump things on a subscription. We all watch it at different times, so it's not event television, right? It's not an event television. Back in like 2007, I was like, knee deep in Doctor Who. Like, I fucking loved that show. But that was event television. You would, same with like the X Factor, Britain's Got Talent. Like, everyone sat and watched it on a Saturday night. And so, but all of that, like, I think talent shows in itself is like out of fashion now. And, Doctor Who's doing its own thing now. And it's like, it could still be event television, but it doesn't have the same, unfortunately, same pool anymore. And I think it's just because it's competing with 50 different shows. Whereas The Traitors is the only thing that's like it, right? It's the only thing that's like it on telly, so it can still be like an event. Gavin and Stacey in 2007, because it had such less competition, and it was its own show. It wasn't like anything else on the air at the time. This kind of like wholesome but hilarious sitcom. So it could pull the audience it did. I wonder, like, if you were to do Gavin and Stacey now, and I don't mean like, as like a special, but like literally start it now, if it would be as successful.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously, a lot of the jokes would have to change. There are
let's modernise it for sure. Yeah,
so many jokes about sexuality, race, gender, fatness that are just not good. But I don't know. It was such a moment in time, and it captured our hearts. 2007, I feel like we were still quite hopeful for the world. There was still kind of a belief that things were going to get better. And I wonder if kind of Gavin and Stacey's earnestness and vulnerability worked during that period. And now I think people are a bit jaded and a bit like, they might watch it and be like, wow, no one's that happy.
Well, it's so interesting because I think about that with like Parks and Rec. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's one of my favourite shows ever. It's one of my like kind of comfort ones. But I think that could not get made now because it had such an optimism for like the future, for government and all that kind of stuff. It would not work now because we don't have that faith in the future. I quickly just Googled, so I knew it existed. But the American version of Gavin and Stacey.
Yeah.
So it was called Us and Them, which is really telling, actually, as a storyline that is very like, us and them, we're very separate. Where Gavin and Stacey is about bringing people together, where this instantly makes you think, oh, we're looking at the division, And
in Gavin and Stacey, they learn about each other's culture. Like, they went to Barry Island and they learned a bit about Welsh culture.
Yes.
And it was about sharing and about, building connection.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my God. So, sorry, I've just read. So bearing in mind, the whole point of Gavin and Stacey is that they are from two different countries, right? England and Wales. And they have different cultures, they have different accents, they have different, like I said, mentioned at the very beginning of the episode, they have different ways of interacting as like family groups. This show is about, first of all, are Americans called Gavin? Like, are there any American Gavins? I feel it's a very British name, but they kept the same names of Gavin and Stacey. And so Gavin lives in New York, and Stacey lives in Pennsylvania. They are
whoa, crazy
worlds apart. Like, what? Let's make it like, I don't know, somewhere in the South. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's so many things you could play off there in America. You know, you could have someone from California who's very laid back, very relaxed. And then you could have someone who's from, like New York, very fast paced.
Yeah, like Eastern Coast. Like,
you have so many opportunities.
Why would you stay 2 East Coast cities?
I know. And America has, they have Hawaii. They have Alaska. They have places that are very culturally different. Yet they choose to do that.
Bizarre. So I just wanted to see who they got to play their Smithy and Nessa. So this person doesn't have a Wikipedia picture, so that doesn't help me.
Oh no, that's telling.
Okay, so Smithy. Oh, okay, he's a larger person. His name is Dustin Ibra, Ibarra. I don't know what he's in. He's in Us, apparently. So, he was Smithy, and then Ashley Atkinson played Nessa. Who are these people? Sorry, Ashley, didn't mean to. Oh, yes, and she is a bigger person. So they did, looks like they did keep the body size kind of references right. And then Jason Ritter played Gavin, and Alexis Bledel, the one from Gilmore Girls, played Stacey. And hold on. So I'm just reading the lore of this. So they premiered it as a mid-season replacement in the 2013/14 season, but they didn't air the whole series, and then they put it all on streaming in 2018, like 4 years later.
That doesn't scream success.
God, Steve Coogan is one of the exec producers.
Wow.
As well as James Corden, Ruth Jones, Matthew Horn, and Joanna Page.
They were like, we need to get a British person on board.
Oh my god, what utter shite. It's like, it reminds me of like when they tried to do the American In-Betweeners.
Oh my god. There was a big period of time where they just kept trying to make British shows American.
Well, it's because The Office did so well.
Yes, except for The Office, none of it translates.
Yeah. Like, and personally, I don't know if this is actually blasphemous to say anymore, but I prefer the American Office to the British one. The British one,
yeah,
I hate cringe comedy. Like, I hate it.
And I also hate Ricky Gervais. So, what am I supposed to do then?
What are we meant to do? We're only human. If I see a bastard on my screen, I'm turning it off. You know what I'm saying?
Like, if I was in a wood and the choice was either Ricky Gervais or a bear, I'd pick a bear.
Every day. So this is a tangent. So we talk about like kind of like what animals we feel we are, me and my husband. And my husband, he's very much an owl. Like, he loves owls. He feels he's an owl all day long. I feel like I'm a bear. Like, I give off bear energy. And so I think if I was in the woods with the bear, they would see me as like an equal
bear. They would sense that.
They were like, you're a good girl. We got you. Like, get away from Ricky Gervais. It's fine.
I always say, if I pussed to a bear, it would come over and let me pet it. That's what I'm always like. It would. I just have that connection with nature.
You do. And I don't want you to try it out, right? I don't. I'm not going to encourage that. But I'm just saying, if that happens, you got to try. You know what I mean? You're probably donezo anyway. So you might as well try to make it spread.
If I'm alone in a wood, something's gone wrong. The
first red flag is, why am I there to begin with?
Yeah.
What is that? Someone's kidnapped me anyway. Okay, so have you got anything else to add on Gavin and Stacey?
I would say that I really love Gavin and Stacey, and I always would recommend people to watch it as a kind of time capsule of what it was like. And as we both said, there are moments that are absolutely hilarious, and the probably some of the funniest comedy I've ever seen. But I want to also acknowledge that it's not going to be for everyone, and it is going to be offensive. And there are moments where it is offensive, but things aren't black and white. You know, nothing is inherently bad or inherently good. There is a greyness to all kind of media. And I think Gavin and Stacey falls into that greyness where it shouldn't be cancelled because of, you know, some of the stuff.
There are worse shows.
There are worse shows that you should not be watching.
Little Britain.
But I think, you know, watch it with a pinch of salt. Would be my suggestion.
I totally agree. I think we are so quick to judge shows for being in the past for being offensive. And the thing is, they should be judged for being offensive. But it doesn't mean that they shouldn't exist. Because but at the same time, Little Britain for me, like, because it's around the same time, and it kind of has the same kind of, you know, it's a BBC sitcom, or well, sketch show, so all that kind of stuff. But that was offensive then, and it is offensive now. Like, that's why they did it, because it was like,
fuck Little Britain,
awful,
fuck David Walliams in particular.
My god, no, literally. Okay, so Holly. At the end of our Facts on Film episode, we like to rate our film or TV show that we've just watched on how well we think that they represent fat bodies or like kind of body diversity, and we like to rate them out of ourselves. So, out of 5 potential Hollies, what would you give Gavin and Stacey for fat representation?
Give it. I'm assuming we're allowed to do half.
You are.
I would give it, in the context that it was written in 2007, it didn't fall out of a coconut tree. I would say a 3.5 because it's very solid in a lot of ways, but you have to take points off for, you know, some of the really awful jokes.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I'm going to give it 3 Hannahs. I'm not far behind you at all. I think you've really persuaded me differently on Smithy. I came in and be like, Smithy's gross, but again, I'm coming in with like a very little bit of knowledge on the show, and so you've turned me on that one. And I love Nessa, and I think, coming back to what James Corden said, it was fantastic to see 2 larger people fall in love and it be like the heart of the show. That's actually what the show really ends up being about. As much as, like, obviously you've got Gavin and Stacey working out whether they want to live in like Essex or Barry. Also, don't get married before you've had that conversation.
It was so frustrating.
Also, sorry, on that, I didn't ask, I was meant to ask, why do they get married so quickly?
So they meet, and 9 weeks later they get married. And I think the thing is, they just don't want to wait. They just love each other and they know they want to be together, so they just get married. But they don't then think about the practical elements of, where are we going to live? What are we going to do about our jobs? I'm like, imagine the luxury of that world where you could just get married and not have to think about any of that stuff.
Yeah, it was a bizarre choice. But yeah, I get it's for the plot as well. Like, it thickens the plot. Okay, all right, sure. But yeah, it pissed me off, and like, I don't even know this show. I was like, why are you not talking about this stuff, babe? Come on. And again, that's why I thought they must be younger, because they haven't thought to think about this. But no, they're almost fucking 30. No excuse. No, but on that, I think that ends up being like the kind of storyline where they're then for, like, we want to see, like, you know, Neil the baby, we want to see how they like co-parent, like, that ends up being kind of like what keeps you coming back, it feels like, which I think is really, really cool, really cool to see, and I'm glad it got made. I think that's how I feel. Like, I'm glad it was made, even if it has some questionable moments. I think it is actually a really important piece of media for the time.
It is, and it's so nice that fatness isn't shoveled in as an afterthought, or as a, you know, I think about like things like Bridgerton, where we see, you know, Penelope, and it really feels like this is your one fat person that you get. She's not even fat.
She's not even fat. No, I know.
And at least Gavin and Stacey had 2 fat characters written by 2
truly
fat
people. Yeah.
And they were just there, and it wasn't a big deal.
No. It's great. I couldn't agree more. Okay, well, thank you so much, Holly, for joining me and guiding me through Gavin and Stacey. I very, very much appreciate it. And it's also, like, you know, introduced something new to my life, which I will now continue to watch. Could you let me and the listeners know where they can find more of you and your work?
Yes, so if you are interested in fat representation, fat heritage, fat history, you can find me on Instagram. It is the.fat.museum, and give me a follow.
Perfect. And like I said earlier, the link to the Fat Museum will be in the show notes below to make it super, super easy for you. And the listeners can find me on, where am I? So my fashion stuff and all that good stuff is at Queen Bee Says on Instagram and TikTok. And you can find the podcast Facts on Film at Instagram. That's it. So I will actually be removing my account. I need to do that. That's on my to-do list. But anyway, give me a follow. You can also email me at factsonfilm@outlook.com. She says very confidently. And yeah, let me know if there's any other media you want to cover, any other guests that you think would be good on the show. Just help me out. I need your help. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, everyone. And remember to stay fat. Woo!